Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 30th of September 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, it's very good to be back, and it's sunny Plymouth, actually. We left Plymouth in the sunshine for Scotland, where unfortunately it was a little bit drizzly, and we came back to yet more sunshine.
Drizzly?
Well, only a small bit of drizzle, actually. And today we're going to be joined by David Scott with Northern Exposure. And, well, there's some really fascinating news, I think, coming to the fore from both north of the border and for UK. But we'll start off by saying that we had an extremely successful evening meeting people in Dunblane. Thank you to David Scott for setting that up. We think about 60 people altogether. Many people coming together to express concerns, deep concerns about what they see happening politically in Scotland and, of course, across the rest of the UK. David, thank you very much for putting that together. What sort of feedback have you had on the evening?
Enormously popular. A lot of people enjoyed it. They got a lot out of it. I certainly found I learned a lot. We were finding many stories, many very interesting histories, and stories and ideas and contacts were coming forward there. So it's the start of something bigger, I think. We've already planned our next meetup, and it was a very good and very worthwhile night. I would also like to say a huge thanks to everyone who dug deep for the Dohertys. We had a collection that raised nearly £400 on the night, and there's been other monies coming via the UK column from the south. So that will be enormously helpful for them, and we'll get that to them just as soon as we can.
David, this is a wonderful thing, isn't it? That people coming together to give each other mutual support, and we often see people being very generous when they are really faced with the predicament of other individuals. And as you say, the Dohertys have been in quite dire straits over the last few months, so this will be great help to them.
So, David, we'll start off with the Common Space article here. Tell us about Robert McAlpine.
Well, this is one of the leading writers from the Common Space, which is an independent supporting internet-based paper with a very, it tends to be a very left-wing communitarian approach to most problems. So they will generally find a large government solution, but it will be a Scottish-based large government solution to any given problem. And they are wholeheartedly behind the idea of Scottish independence. It's an interesting article here because it acknowledges certain truths which have been hidden from the independent supporting public for some time, namely the growing unpopularity of the SNP government, the growing unpopularity of Nicola Sturgeon, and the realisation not only that the economic case for independence on which it was built, because remember the case that was put forward to the Scottish people is more free stuff, more money, and essentially easy street will result from independence. That was clearly has been shown by events to be a lie. So that basis for independence is crumbling, and there is a realisation that it's all going really quite wrong in the pro-independence world, and they are being shown to be bereft of ideas for tackling the real problems of the country. So he's starting to look into this. He's starting to acknowledge the limitations and the fact that perhaps the moment has in fact passed in 2014 with the last independence referendum.
Well, of course, the problems in the country, at the heart of them is the relationship between individuals and the government of various types. Now, last week you announced the launch of the Highland investigation because you want to investigate Highland Council and how it's treating Highlanders. And you sent this to us this morning, which is some of the feedback that you've had on that already. And this looks pretty harrowing.
It certainly is. I'll just read out a few bits here. It says, I was a foster carer for the Highland Council in Inverness for 2 years. I witnessed a female social worker sexually abuse a 10-year-old boy in the local Lidl's car park. When he was in my care. When I reported it, it was 5 years of hell for me as well as a child. I was accused of being a liar and worse by social services. Highland Council, Child Protection, and the Scottish Parliament and the Highland Police Force constituted one big cover-up. Coppers on the shop floor were not happy, but the investigation was stopped from very high up with no explanation. I had my name removed from the authorised carers list and blacklisted from being a foster carer. As Social Service Inverness threatened me. As Social Service Inverness threatened me if I didn't drop the allegation. And the excuse for getting rid of me, they claim I didn't pass on information and I wasn't seen as a team player. Highland Council Social Services need looking into. Why are they protecting staff that have a history of abusing children? And why are they being protected by police and Scottish ministers? So there's more information up there on the screen. People can perhaps look at that as they freeze the screen.
Well, actually, it's worth just mentioning that if they do that, one of the things that they're going to read is that somebody saying that they know that the child concerned, who's now an adult and now has issues, including self-harm. So clearly a long-term damage being done there.
Absolutely, and another interesting thing is the child concerned, whilst the child said, don't report this to the police. If you report this to the police, I'll be taken away from you, you'll never see me again, and it will be worse for both of us. So the child, despite being a child in the system, knew the score, and the score is, don't complain, don't look for justice, or it will go badly for you. So this is one example, and we're seeing many. We're getting a huge amount of information from Highland. This is really starting to pour in now. So we're planning our next trip at the end of October, the last Wednesday in October. We will be going to Inverness to have a meeting there. Along these lines, there will be a UK column and Northern Exposure meeting in Inverness, specifically to look at the issues that are coming out of Highland. And those issues have many themes, one of which is parents have been targeted. Parents have been viewed as the enemy by the Highland Council.
Yes, okay, well, just before we move on from this, and we'll put up this one, because this, just to remind everybody how to contact you if they want to get involved in this investigation. The email address on the screen, that's northern_exposure@hushmail.com. So anybody any people working for Highland Council who want to pass along information, anybody that's been on the receiving end of Highland Council, that's the contact email address.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, let's move on to the Scottish Nationalist Party then. Now, you sent me a tweet with a little video clip. Who's this gentleman on screen at the moment?
This is Murdo Fraser of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, and he's asking a question at First Minister's Question Time.
And so he's asked, is the First Minister confident that Police Scotland have the resources to deal with the upsurge in the workload? And of course, what was he referring to? The number of allegations being made against Scottish National Party members?
Yes, the number of ongoing investigations and arrests being made concerning SNP MPs. They were famously the 56 of the 59 Scottish MPs being SNP members, constituting a large bloc in Parliament. They are now the 53 because 3 are suspended due to ongoing police investigations.
And Nippy's response was a bit sort of dismissive. I mean, she tried to turn it around into some kind of political point about Conservatives, but she didn't address the point that really was at the heart of the question.
She neither addressed the point at the heart of the question, nor did she even recognise, let alone respond with the obvious humour of the situation, where Police Scotland resources are being exhausted by criminal wrongdoing within the parliamentary SNP party.
Yes, and meanwhile at SNP HQ, what's going on there?
Yes, there's a wonderful tweet here from a Labour supporting man who's often on Twitter, and it's a variation on the never-ending Simpsons policy of poking fun at the nuclear industry. And it says here that the man in the suit has got an SNP logo on, and it says, "Days without a financial scandal." And the gentleman behind is taking down a number 1 and putting up a number 0. So it's been 0 days since the last SNP financial scandal.
And what's the latest one?
Well, is that no? You see, there was two in the last 2 days. We've had 2 different MPs. We've found out the police are taking action against 2 different MPs in Westminster, 2 different SNP MPs. So yes, it's 1 a day at the moment.
Excellent. Hope that keeps up. Right, abuse of trust then.
Yes, this is an interesting piece. We have the Noble Lord Jana, who has been stated by the police as having a case against him, a case which obviously he never faced in court, which was absolutely compelling, with enormous amounts of evidence and witnesses coming forward to explain how he abused them as children. So he used his influence, his power, his political connections, his connections with children's homes, etc., to carry out attacks and prey on the vulnerable. And as you cannot libel the dead, the Leicester Mercury here is reporting that this is going to be put into print. An existing book has been revised. It covers these sorts of areas, and an extra chapter on Mr. Jana is being added in, and that will record in writing, in the printed word, an outline of his crimes and what the victims have stated that he did.
Right, so the book is called Abuse of Trust, and the author is saying the extra chapter does not state an opinion about whether Greville Janner was guilty or innocent, but it does look at the substantial allegations against him that mean he should have been put on trial. These are the things that can be said now that because of defamation laws could not be said before his death. So I suppose we should suggest people have a look at that.
Well, we should, but we can also, of course, add, Mike, that we are fully aware that a pamphlet was produced when Greville Janner was still alive, accusing him of the abuse of certainly young teenagers. And originally that pamphlet was attributed to the Labour Party research group. However, we now know that they didn't actually produce the document. It was produced by unknown persons, but it was a very detailed, well-written and informative pamphlet that was originally circulated with a £2 price tag on it. Now, we have a copy of that document, and I would imagine that this would also have been of great interest now because, of course, what is the book about? It is about victims coming forward and openly stating that they were abused by Greville Janner. So the information is there. Be very interesting to see what, if anything, takes place.
So, but in the meantime, the abuse inquiry in London falling apart?
Well, falling apart, Michael, being taken apart. So, yeah, we've got the first one on screen here. BBC, abuse victims saddened as Ben Emerson QC quits the inquiry. So we've got this QC standing down. I've put up the BBC's analysis of the strands of the inquiry. They're 13, that magic number they often use. And so quite a widespread. Of course, none of these allegations in any of these areas are true, according to the BBC, because there is no child abuse, really. But all of these places listed. But I noticed that as an institution, the BBC isn't one of them listed, Mike. But maybe that's a bit of an oversight. But this is on to the meat of it with the Mail here. This fiasco of sex abuse inquiry is totally out of control. And as to end now, says public barrister Barbara Hewson. Well, I would have thought her English was a little bit better than that, but I think it's a Daily Mail typo. I haven't, but what I just thought we'd do is just a little bit of recap on Ms. Hewson, and then I'm sure you've got some fairly deep comment on this, David. So let's remind ourselves of what this lady has been up to. Well, she has been on BBC and in wider mainstream media, basically laughing at any abuse victims who say they were abused in a ritualistic environment. We contrasted this at the time with a document about satanic ritual abuse, which was suddenly released by the Children's Commissioner. We're not sure why. This was January 2012, but it was very interesting that if this doesn't exist, there are many people who are prepared to publish reports on it. So this is a bit more. Cameron could also crack down on spurious allegations of historical sex abuse, a veritable abuse industry. So this woman, very arrogant, very cold, sneering at children, teenagers, adults who come forward to say they're abused. And she thinks most of it's hype and most of people are chasing money. But the press lover, Huffington Post here, Barbara Hewson stands by age of consent article, and here she is criticising the Utree investigation. So she wasn't going to support that at all. So if we summarise her, really, she was campaigning for the age, or arguing for the age of consent to be lowered to 13. That, of course, nicely drifts it down. Well, the law says 13, but they were only 11. Well, it was just a natural mistake to make. So that's how you normalise paedophilia, in my view. She said clearly on BBC that satanic ritual abuse doesn't exist. It's like alien abduction. Notice the smirk on her face in this still. Of course, at the time, she did actually laugh. She asks if it's helpful or kind to encourage people in mature middle age to recall unpleasant or brutal experiences from their childhood. This is the inversion of logic. Let's forget about it. And this one got me very interested. She said this: "It's timely that a moral philosopher at Yale University, David Reef, recently published a book entitled In Praise of Forgetting. He challenges the conventional wisdom that we need to remember so as to avoid the past mistakes. His argument that some things are better left in the past is just another reason why we should ditch this inquiry now before it wastes any more public money." So we had a look at the man in question, and it's very interesting, Mike. He's a George Soros Open Society man. He's also linked in with the World Policy Institute. So these are people who say they are the right people to decide how the world should govern itself. We need a new world order, clearly stated. And I'd get the impression that these are the sorts of people that would like anything goes where sexual relations are concerned, and that includes children. Now, David, we'll give you an open floor, as it were, and I know that you're going to mention children's charity Bernardo's, which we've got lined up as the next slide. But what's your impression on Hewson and the collapse, I think the near collapse of the CSA?
Well, firstly on Hewson, the reason I mentioned the Twitter account is she has a whole series of foul-mouthed attacks on victims, on people who've suffered, on anybody who claims that abuse is real or that justice is not being served in our current society. We did at one point point out to her on Twitter that all of the logos and avatars she was using were in fact satanic symbols, and asked why. They slowly changed after that, and she stopped interacting with us once we sort of revealed how much we knew about what some of the symbols meant. And on this matter of reducing the age of consent to 13, the age of consent is officially 16, and in practice it already is 13, because if you look at the deeper guidance documents that go out to local authorities, to schools, between 13 and 16 is viewed as a grey area, as although it's below the age of consent, it's essentially allowed, providing there's some sort of view that it's not inherently abusive. So there's a grey area there already. So what would happen is, if the formal consent age was taken down to 13, that grey area, as you pointed out earlier, Brian, would move to younger still. And we've seen this before. We've seen it from organisations like Liberty, and we've seen it from disgusting organisations like NAMBLA, that the ambition here is to drive the age of consent down to essentially 0.
Yeah, NAMBLA, if I remember that correctly, is the North American
Man Boy
Boy.
Love Association.
Right, okay.
Now, as far as
David,
sorry,
if I can just interject, because I'm
Yeah.
just anticipating partly what you're going to say here, but in the Mail article, so Hewitt given acres of text by the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail doesn't want to report on the majority of abuse cases, but they'll give Barbara Hewson at least a page and a half. One of the things she said is she'd like to see the present investigation closed, and she'd like to see some sort of parliamentary committee being advised by the present child protection agencies and charities. Over to you.
Well, yes, and wouldn't that be a safe pair of hands? It would be a safe pair of hands for the abusers, because as the victims well know, these charities, these agencies who are there allegedly to protect them do nothing of the sort. These are the people who have been having the reports for many, many years of horrendous abuse, and yet nothing has been done. It's been covered up. And if there's a response at all, it is to target the victim, and if the victim has any children, to seize those children. These are the patterns we see. We also have to remember that in Scotland, the Scottish inquiry is in similar disarray, and an organisation set up by the Scottish Government to help abuse victims is also now being heavily criticised as simply seeing being the subject of abuse as a medical condition. It's a psychiatric problem, it's a medical problem, we will medicate you, not we will help you get justice.
Well, in fact, it was the Scottish inquiry that started all this, because it was your side of the border that decided to have all these mass resignations, and clearly the English inquiry has thought that was a great idea. We can delay things even further if we do that. So we had Goddard resign, and we've got a new resignation. But it was you guys that started it, right?
I think intimidation by the Scottish Government is maybe a little more obvious than intimidation by the Westminster Government. Therefore, it took the people appointed here less time to realise their position was completely untenable and to leave.
Yes, okay, well, let's look at one of the children's charities then, Bernardo's, because they seem to have a 10-year plan.
Yes, they're doing major expansion work. You know, Bernardo's are looking after the revenue streams. They're planning on expanding their work, expanding their workforce, expanding their turnover, and this has been done on a rising tide of child poverty they see. So this would suggest a couple of questions. One, are these organisations, and not specifically Bernardo's, but the third sector in general, who are now an extension to the state, have they really any incentive to solve the problems they're allegedly there to tackle? Because, of course, by solving them, the reason for being in existence, or at least the reason for growing, would be removed. So we've got a lot of salaries, we've got a big sector, the third sector is now huge. It's particularly at a high level, really rather well paid, and there's a lot of incentive to keep it all going. Is that in the best interest of the children? I really wonder. And the other point, of course, is why should we, having seen a reduction in poverty in this country from as far back as the eye can see, at least since the start of the Industrial Revolution. So if you put that back to about 1750, there's been a substantial reduction and more or less continual reduction in poverty, all the way from then until certainly early 1970s, when we came off the last remnants of the gold standard, and arguably until about 1990. But it's reversed, has it? We're now seeing an increase in child poverty. Why would that be? What's driving that? And certainly whatever's driving it is not something that Bernardo's are going to be addressing.
No, indeed.
Well, my last comment on this, of course, if we look at the tens of years that organisations of Bernardo's have been operating, whatever they say they're doing, they've clearly failed, because despite their best efforts, the abuse is on the increase. But as you say, if you talk to abuse survivors, many of them point a finger directly at the charities themselves, Bernardo's NSPCC Childline, and say don't go near them because people inside are also involved in the abuse. And the last thing I'll just add into that is we've learnt, thanks to people north of the border, that children, certainly in Scotland, within local authorities and child protection, are known as commodities. This reinforces your point, David, of the financial value of children. And then, of course, we've got children's protection charities like Core Assets, simply describing the children as assets. I think it's pretty easy to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And yet the PR spin remains covered under the word charity. That we're here, we care, and it gets the public and the mainstream media to look the other way and not ask the hard questions about what the incentives are and where the money's actually going.
Now, of course, one other organisation that isn't doing its job in this regard is the police, and so it should come as no surprise, perhaps, that now that Bernard Hogan-Howe, the man in charge of the Metropolitan Police, has decided to retire, it's perhaps no surprise that people that have a reputation, a long-standing reputation for protecting paedophiles, are in the front line for replacing him at the Metropolitan Police.
Yes, and I was amazed and delighted in some ways to see that all of the work that the UK column, and particularly you, Brian, have put into looking at one particular officer might not be wasted, because that officer is in the running for the very highest post in British policing.
And of course, you're talking about Sarah Thornton, and well, we have a bit of history with her.
Well, of course, yeah. So Sarah Thornton was the boss of Thames Valley Police Force, and at the time that abuse was going on in Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, and paedophile gangs were operating through Oxford, it was her police force that were clearly protecting people who were there in the trade of children, and they certainly were not protecting the Asian gentleman who was bullied and harassed and threatened for reporting child abusers. So, despite all the evidence that came forward, there was absolutely no movement by Sarah Thornton's police at all. And then, of course, the icing on the cake was they set up their child protection initiative, Operation Kingfisher, in the very police station, which had originally been turning away girls who had gone there for sanctuary while they were being trafficked and abused by child abusers within Oxford. So something very dirty and cynical around Sarah Thornton. And then we better mention Cressida Dick, who's also going to be given yet more power. Of course, this is the common purpose graduate extraordinaire who ends up in a disastrous police operation where people are shot in London, de Menendez, and it's no problem. Let's promote the woman.
Yes.
The Witches of Eastwick on the rise, I think, and with Theresa May as Prime Minister, former Home Secretary, who obviously helped the cover-up over all of this situation, we've got some very dangerous women coming into post. And I'm going to say, I think it is significant that we are now starting to see these women promoted to very top positions. If anybody's feeling a bit squeamish about that remark, I happen to think that these are women who are chosen because they are particularly dangerous. Challenge me or correct me on that, David, if you think I'm on the wrong line. But I think there's something
I just think it's very interesting that all the 2/3 of the people in the running for the top job happen to be people that the UK column have raised very serious concerns about in the past. Now, you've covered policing as an issue consistently, but you've only focused on a very small number of individual officers, and 2 of those on the running for the top job. It just seems remarkable. I just wonder whether this will extend to these candidates being asked some very searching questions in any interaction they have with the public, or even, who knows, perhaps the public's alleged political representatives. And perhaps the work of the UK column will see that neither of these people, in fact, get the post.
Yeah.
Let us hope so.
That's what we can aim for. Now, you wanted to highlight an event upcoming.
Yes, this is a follow-up to the event that Brian attended in Lanark. So this is another event to look at child protection issues and to hear the voice of people who have suffered abuse as children. It's been held in Dundee on the 2nd of November. So if anyone can make it along to that, we'd be delighted to see you there. And the last one was very well attended and absolutely fascinating. There was a huge amount of information came out, and very moving stories, and it was viewing the people there, it was really a lesson in courage. It was very impressive indeed.
And of course, David, there was no sign of Barbara Hewson or any member of Child Protection or anybody from any of the major charities. So as the survivors told their story, and as you say, incredibly emotional to hear people recount events that had happened to them, say, 60 years previously, and what effect that had had on their lives. Not one single person from the agencies that say they're there to protect children. Well,
this is true, but I would also point out they were probably too frightened to turn up, because the survivors are extremely well informed, and really the people who've got to the point of being able to speak out do not tolerate fools and do not tolerate lies, and why should they? And anybody who would stand up and try and put some political spin into that sort of audience would not last long, I would suggest.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Well, on the positive note, what can we do about all of this? And of course, the meeting in Scotland is a prime example. We need people to be coming together, bringing the truth, bringing the evidence to the fore, and also helping one another. Now, November the 19th in Winchester, we've got the British Constitution Group meeting. This is in recognition that we are now living in a lawless state. It is quite apparent that the police are not doing their jobs. The judges are certainly not doing their jobs. Courts are being run as places of businesses. We're in an unlawful country which is rapidly becoming out of control. We need to discuss what's happening, and we also need to talk about what we can do to correct things from within a lawless state. So this is going to be a really exceptional British Constitution Group meeting. And we have some excellent speakers, including David, your good self, but we also have Alex Thompson, who we hope to be there. Vanessa Beeley is going to be joining us to talk about what's been happening in Syria. And of course, that abuse of an overseas nation state can only happen by the fact that we have effectively a criminal elite in Westminster. So we will be making a formal announcement of the speakers in the forthcoming days, so stay posted for that. If you buy your ticket in advance, it's £10, otherwise it will be £20 at the door. So we'd encourage people to do an online booking as soon as you can.
David, we're getting a bit short on time, so we'll move through this reasonably quickly if we can. You wanted to highlight Tactical Investor here, and this article, Negative Rates are godsend for the greedy, unscrupulous corporate world.
Yes, that rather says it all. And there's a little further down in this article, there's a little diagram that shows where negative rates are actually at. And the number one country is, in fact, Switzerland, where rates are negative out to 10 years. So why would anybody in the world lend the Swiss government money for 10 years, at the end of which they would get back less than they actually had to start with? Why would they do that? It's a very bizarre system. It's now the only thing, this free money, this negative interest rates, this bizarre system is the only thing that's propping up the financial system the world over.
Which this little cartoon hints at.
Yes, and this is the various heads of the various world banks having painted themselves into a corner, and I thought that put it beautifully. because having reduced rates to zero, to negative territory, where do you go? Because this is saying to people, pile on debt. It's saying particularly to governments, pile on debt, more debt, more debt, more debt. If you then normalise interest rates and return to a system where you can have an incentive to save and people can be frugal and save for their retirement and actually have a retirement and not be thrown into poverty, if you return to that system, everything is immediately bust because the debt is so enormous now that normal interest rates would mean that basically every government in the Western world would be bankrupt.
Right. So it's interesting you say that because they've been talking about in recent weeks, we've been mentioning that quantitative easing has basically run out of things to buy. And I noticed today a number of people asking the question, are central banks going to start buying stocks?
Well, there's a sale on with Deutsche Bank shares at the moment. That might be a good buy for central bankers.
Which is a fantastic segue into exactly that issue because we're going to talk about Deutsche Bank now. Of course, Deutsche Bank shares not the best shares to be buying at the moment because, in fact, in the last 12 months they have fallen by 54% and are at historic lows. At some point today, they were down a further 8%. I think they recovered slightly before we just came back on air, but nonetheless, 54% down in the last 12 months. We'll come on to that a bit more in a second. But I wanted to highlight Mario Draghi because he's basically saying it's not his fault. He's saying if a bank represents a systemic threat, it cannot be because of low interest rates. It has to be for other reasons. And I just wondered if you had a one-liner on that.
What he's saying, that is actually quite meaningless. It can, if a bank represents a systemic threat, it's because it is essentially insolvent, and all that low interest rates are going to do is paper over that for a little while longer. So, okay, it's not due to low interest rates. Low interest rates are simply a smokescreen to conceal the basic problem, and the basic problem is the bankrupt.
But that's basically what he's saying. It's sloppy shoulder syndrome. He's saying it's nothing to do with me. It's somebody else's problem that Deutsche Bank's in difficulty. Is basically what he's at. Now, of course, Christine Lagarde had to weigh in as well because she said Deutsche Bank is a systemic, important player in the global financial system, but it's on a solid base currently, and we're not at the stage where I see any need for government intervention, and it is impossible not to laugh at that statement.
I think she's talking about the physical structure of the building rather than the actual assets of the bank.
Well, I'm sceptical even about the state of that. But anyway, let's talk about what Deutsche Bank themselves are saying. Because, of course, the news, they admitted today that several of the larger hedge fund clients have been withdrawing money. In other words, they're running for the door. They're trying to get their money out of Deutsche Bank in full recognition that Deutsche Bank is about to go under. And John Cryan didn't want to admit that. So he sent a little note round saying, "Dear colleagues, you will have seen speculation in the media that a few of our hedge fund clients have reduced some activities with us. That is causing unjustified concerns. We should consider this in the context of the bigger picture. Deutsche Bank overall has more than 20 million clients. They're all going to lose their money," but he didn't say that. That's my words. He went on to say, "I understand if you feel concerned by the extensive coverage in this issue. Our bank has become subject to speculation. Ongoing rumours are causing significant swings in our stock market. In our stock price. It's all
those nasty rumour mongers, Mike. In fact, it's your fault.
He basically
wrong with the bank. It's you've suggested there's a problem, and now there is. So you should be more confident. You should be buying some shares here.
Well, no, because let's just look at the share price because there is the graph. And that is the share price over the last 12 months. So the last thing you want to be doing is buying any Deutsche Bank shares at the moment.
Yeah. Where do you go with that? See this thing about don't worry, everything's sound. People have to remember they will never tell you, right? When a major bank like Deutsche Bank is going to go pop, people like Christine Lagarde will always lie. It was not Draghi who said when it really gets serious, you have to lie. Remember in the tequila crisis when the peso was hugely devalued against the dollar. The day before, the Mexican government was saying that there is no problem, we will not devalue. We are completely committed to the parity with the dollar. We will remain at the existing mark, and there will be no devaluation. And the next day, they cut it by something like 70%. They will never tell you.
Indeed. Okay, but you wanted to highlight this from Zero Hedge. Panic in the kingdom, Saudi currency, bonds, bank extends collapse despite OPEC deal. And of course, we had the OPEC deal, which for about 6 hours or something saw oil prices going up. And that didn't last even till about 10 o'clock this morning.
Well, it's another triumph for Austrian economics, because Austrian economics says that cartels never work. Sooner or later, usually sooner, they break down. And it's also a sign that, in fact, domestic oppression and oil is not enough to build an economy upon.
Yes. Okay, well, something that perhaps is enough to build an economy upon is arms sales. So let's talk about Syria for a minute, because, of course, that's the hottest area in the Middle East at this point in time. People should possibly look away at this point, because we're about to show a picture of Boris Johnson. And here he is with a white helmet. Excellent. We like to see that.
He's clearly had a haircut so that he can probably wear it.
Well, he has, because he's looking very smart and trim these days. But what we're going to do now is we're going to show a short video that he made yesterday or the day before. So this is video 1, Theo, please. And we'll have some comment about this after we watch.
Hi folks, I'm here in Gaziantep, or near Gaziantep, at a huge refugee camp, which is one of the camps that is being supported by the UK. People don't realise we're giving about £2.3 billion in aid to Syria. And I've just met some of the people who were supporting with a big programme to train the police force in cities like Aleppo and Hama and Idlib, places where they need security, they need reassurance, they need the police to be integrated with society, being funded by UK taxpayers and people being trained by former UK military staff. Absolutely overwhelming to see it. And of course, a mine clearing operation being done by the White Helmets. Now, these are fantastically brave people who go to the site of explosions and pull people from bombings. They pull people from the rubble. One of the most sickening things now, of course, is that the Russians and the regime are double tapping. As soon as the White Helmets come to the site and start to rescue the wounded and take them away, they bomb again. And I think that is absolutely unthinkable and outrageous way to behave. But they are fantastically brave, these White Helmets. I'm proud to say we're giving them another, I think, £32 million of funding as part of a wider £65 million package for non-humanitarian aid. So it's basically a huge chain of actions and support by the UK to try to remedy the Syrian crisis.
Okay, so I just want to highlight a couple of points. He's giving the White Helmets £32 million out of a £62 million tranche of non-humanitarian aid. Now, the White Helmets are supposed to be a humanitarian organisation, but this is non-humanitarian aid. And he also acknowledged in that little video clip that the White Helmets are being trained by ex-UK military staff. And now you might say that they're being trained he might say that they're being trained to disarm mines, and that's why military staff are involved. But I still ask the question, how is this non-humanitarian aid? So let's look at another short video. This is going to be split in two. And let's look at what the White Helmets are actually doing on the ground in Syria. And I believe this video is from Idlib. So here we go.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر يا شباب الله أكبر.
Right, so what we saw there was a number of White Helmets in amongst al-Nusra terrorists. Now, in the past, there have been allegations that White Helmets have been working with al-Nusra, or that they are al-Nusra. And of course, the White Helmets have countered this argument by saying, no, they're there only doing humanitarian work. They don't get involved in what al-Nusra is up to. But if al-Nusra, for example, kills somebody on the streets, then the White Helmets are there to clean up the mess afterwards. that there's nobody else to do it. Well, what we saw there was a number of white helmets in amongst the Al-Nusra people. They had taken captive a Syrian army person, and so they had a prisoner, and that one of the white helmets quite clearly was witnessed striking quite hard the prisoner. So this white helmet was not an innocent bystander standing from the side. So let's watch a little bit more.
الله أكبر صبر صدره صبر صدره يا شباب
And what you saw at the end there was the white gloved hand of the white helmet pulling the shirt down of the prisoner. And on the prisoner was a tattoo which said Bashar and Hafez. Of course, Hafez was Bashar al-Assad's father. And quite a number of the Assad loyalists have these markings on them. So what they were doing was demonstrating for the video that their prisoner was an Assad, somebody from the Assad side of the conflict. But what this video shows for the first time, I believe this is the first time we've seen a video showing direct participation by a white helmet or a group of white helmets in al-Nusra activities. Now, nobody knows what happened to that prisoner, but the assumption is that he was then executed. I would like Boris Johnson to comment on this because he is pumping another £32 million into this organisation, and the evidence just continues to pile up that they are terrorists.
Well, the number of questions that perhaps we can be saying to our audience today, perhaps you'd help us with this business of challenging Boris Johnson. When was there a debate on 2.3 billion in aid? And was there any debate on where that aid was spent? So we got 65 million was that first figure towards out of the non-humanitarian aid towards the white helmet. So whose decision was this? Theresa May, David Cameron's, Boris Johnson's? We don't know. So perhaps our audience could help us establish that.
Indeed. Well, we'll move on to Russian propaganda now, because this is a fantastically hypocritical article in Foreign Policy magazine, How MH17 Gave Birth to the Modern Russian Spin Machine. The downing of a passenger flight over Ukraine triggered an extraordinary campaign of lying, disassembling, and distortion, that has not stopped since. And this article goes on to berate the Russians for their propaganda machine. And this is coming from a magazine which is right at the heart of the Western establishment's propaganda machine. It is amazing. And who wrote this article? I do recommend people read it. Who wrote it? It was a guy called Ben Nimmo. He is Information Defense Fellow with the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, an analyst on defense and international security, specializing, he says, on patterns and trends on disinformation and hybrid warfare. So he's perhaps best placed to write some disinformation himself. He has apparently worked for a writer and a journalist throughout Europe, including with NATO, and particularly NATO-Russia and NATO-Ukraine relations. He's a senior fellow of the Institute for Statecraft in London, associate scholar for the Centre for European Policy Analysis, and he speaks multiple languages, including Russian. So perhaps if you do go and read that article, Foreign Policy magazine, you read it in the context of who it is that's written it. But for anybody in the Western media at this point to be criticizing any other country, especially Russia, of this type of spin, since spin doctor, the term was created in this country, I think. So it's incredible.
Sickening.
Yeah.
David, just give you a brief comment on what we've just covered there before we really emphasise the sheer hypocrisy that's Britain at the moment.
I think the point about funding and terrorism is very interesting, because how do governments do this? We've discussed that Britain and France and the United States are are funding the breakup of Syria and funding the terrorist groups. But governments fund via budgets, and they have to hide it somewhere. There's a very interesting piece by Catherine Austin-Fitts, who was Department of Housing head under Bush Jr. She was given this post. She went in, she started to ask questions like, how do I know if we're losing money or making money? And they said, well, we don't really know that. I said, well, is it a budget? Yes, it's a budget. So they gave her this huge pile of paper. She read through it, said, well, there's nothing really that gives me that information. I need more information. She had to get different departments to report to her before she could get the financial information. She found they were losing £11 million a day. Nobody knew. She then took another 2 months to find out where it was going, and it was only going to 2 out of 10 regions. One of them was Texas and Arkansas, right, which was losing $2 billion a year, right? And so spoke to the man running that department. He thought he was breaking even because Texas and Arkansas was where the Iran-Contra was being run from. That was where Mina Airport was. So the budget was going through the housing department. Who knew? But it was running terrorist activities. So if we are running terrorism in Syria, there will be a financial trail, but it will be hidden. It'd be very interesting to find out which departments it's hidden in, and overseas aid would be a candidate.
Absolutely. Well, David, let's come back to Russia, because, of course, one of the things that Russia today has been getting increasingly good at is pointing the finger in the right direction. And they have this really excellent article, Game of Drones, and there's a documentary which goes with it. And they're focusing on the use of drones, particularly in attacks in Pakistan, which have killed hundreds of people. And it's freely admitted, at least by the US government, that, oh dear, we've killed several tens of thousands of completely innocent civilians. Well, if you get into the article, these are some of the comments. There's a gentleman, Imran Khan, and he says killing people by these drones, basically sitting on a screen and eliminating people, dehumanizing them, treating them like they're from some other planet, not giving them basic rights of proving their innocence. It violates all norms of justice. Well, who could disagree with that statement? And then they've also done their research. So Russia Today has sought out the operators of drones, and they're pointing out Sean Westmoreland here. And they say he's also dealing with the after effects of drone attacks, but for a very different reasons. Since serving as a drone communications technician in the Air Force, he has struggled to come to terms with the roles he played in the strikes. Now, we've mentioned this before, but you imagine you leave home in the morning, you say goodbye to your wife and child, or your husband, if you're a woman who's involved in the killing, and you go in and you sit down effectively in a gaming room and you murder people thousands of miles away who've had absolutely no opportunity to protest their innocence in any court of any description. Now, contrast the reality of what's going on with the bizarre language of this man, Air Commodore Dean Andrew. So this is the RAF boss in charge of the drone operation. He said in relation to the unlawful killing of Syrian government troops, that his systems relied on several different sources that are checked and cross-checked. There's a strong corroboration which leaves little room for single stream failure. So we pointed out, of course, that, well, indeed, there had been failure, and he didn't seem too bothered about that. But the other bit, and I'll bring it up very quickly, was the bizarre language this man is using, because he talks about needing staff that have their apertures open to change, and he's transforming the RAF. So they're obviously going to have more drones operated by more people with their apertures open, and we can expect more death. Now, this is part of lies and spin, and just to highlight points you were making there, if we go back through and look at reports, it's always overseas country that are the terrorists, the people torturing, familiar faces here. But of course, the moment we try and get the truth out of our own country, Jack Straw didn't want to release information under freedom of information, independent reporting, complicity in torture, hypocrisy, And we asked a few weeks ago, why was David Cameron using Jack Straw to help cover up government crimes? So the deeper you go into it, the more you find that the British government simply does not want to tell the truth about what they're doing. And the last thing they're going to do is push out information. So I'm going to say war crimes. We're watching war crimes, and it's our own politicians that are deceiving the public. It's fairly straightforward. David, we were recently given a book which was absolutely fascinating, written by a Guardian journalist, but what he was showing that Britain had been complicit in torture for many years. He started during the Second World War. He talked about the torture of German ex-military and civilians immediately after the war, and then expanded through to torture in Iraq. People have dismissed this book as sort of conspiracy theory. I don't know whether you've managed to get into it a bit, but any comments?
I haven't managed to get to that one yet. There used to be a realization in this country that torture didn't work, and there was a belief that we didn't do it. There was a belief that we were better than that. It seems that belief was misplaced. It's certainly the case now where it's policy. It's hidden, it's concealed. There's no light, there's no fresh air, but it is policy. I don't think the people of this country are of a mind to accept that from their leaders. They are being deceived, they're being kept in the dark. And our job, all of us, is to dispel that darkness and let the people actually see what's been done in their name.
Indeed. Well, I'll just bring the book up on screen very briefly before you finish. There are a couple of differences into the title. This is not quite the title of the book I've got, but Cruel Britannia, A Secret History of Torture, evidence-based book showing the British government fully involved in the torture of people worldwide. This is the sickening reality of our government at present, and we need to get the truth out. So we'll end on a note. What can we do? Well, the meeting in Scotland shows what happens when you bring people together, good people together. That gives the enthusiasm and the wherewithal to start digging for the truth and evidence. And it's exposure that does 99% of the damage. So if you're sitting at home listening to this thinking, what can you do? Find a friend or other friends, contact us or the British Constitution Group, and get pushing out evidence with other people. David, thank you very much for joining us. That brings us to the end of today's UK column. We will be back
to Scotland this week. It was very, very helpful. It was great to see you, and it was much appreciated by all the people that turned out. So thanks again.
Okay, thank you. We'll be back at the same time on Monday. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
All right.